Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, declared that World War III has already begun, albeit in a new form, accusing Western nations of actively instigating global conflicts to maintain their perceived dominance and strategically weaken Russia. Speaking at the Territory of Meanings Forum, Lavrov elaborated on his claims, asserting that NATO's continued actions in Ukraine, coupled with prior Western interventions in various parts of the Middle East, signify the commencement of a broader, more profound confrontation. This confrontation, according to Lavrov, is fundamentally aimed at achieving Russia's strategic defeat on the global stage. He presented a narrative in which Moscow finds itself isolated, fighting alone against what he termed the collective West, a powerful bloc of nations united against Russian interests. Lavrov issued a stark warning, specifically mentioning Germany and other NATO member states, alleging that these nations are actively preparing for direct military engagement with Russian forces, which would mark a significant and dangerous escalation of the current global tensions. The Russian foreign minister further stated that the United States and the European Union are deeply complicit in these provocations, with their policies and actions contributing to the increasing instability and confrontational atmosphere worldwide. He emphasized that the West's primary goal is to undermine Russia's sovereignty and influence, thereby solidifying its own unipolar world order, which Moscow vehemently opposes. Lavrov's rhetoric at the Territory of Meanings Forum highlighted a consistent theme in Russian foreign policy, which often frames international relations as a struggle against perceived Western hegemony. He asserted that the current geopolitical landscape is not merely a series of isolated incidents, but rather a deliberate and coordinated effort by Western powers to encircle and diminish Russia. This perspective is deeply rooted in historical grievance and a sense of encirclement that has long permeated Russian strategic thinking. Lavrov drew parallels between the present situation and past global conflicts, suggesting that the methods of warfare may have evolved, but the underlying power struggles remain the same. He articulated that the West's support for Ukraine, including the provision of advanced weaponry and intelligence, is not an act of defending a sovereign nation, but rather a proxy war designed to bleed Russia dry and destabilize its government. The Russian foreign minister also pointed to the expansion of NATO eastward, arguing that this military alliance has aggressively encroached upon Russia's traditional sphere of influence, thereby creating an unavoidable security dilemma for Moscow. According to Lavrov, Russia's actions in Ukraine are therefore a defensive response to these provocations, a necessary measure to protect its national interests and ensure its long-term security against an aggressive and expansionist Western bloc. The accusations leveled against Germany and other NATO members regarding their alleged preparations for direct military engagement with Russian forces represent a significant escalation in diplomatic rhetoric. Lavrov's comments are designed to underscore the perceived threats from the West and to rally domestic support for Russia's foreign policy agenda. He suggested that the military exercise and increased defense spending by NATO countries are not merely defensive posturing, but rather a prelude to more direct and confrontational actions. This narrative seeks to portray Russia as a victim of Western aggression, forced to defend itself against an existential threat. Lavrov's remarks also aim to divide the Western alliance by singling out Germany, a key economic and political player within the European Union and NATO. By suggesting that Germany is preparing for war, Lavrov attempted to tap into historical anxieties and to sow discord within the alliance, potentially weakening its collective resolve against Russia. He reiterated that Russia is fully prepared to defend its border and its interests, implying that any direct military engagement initiated by NATO would be met with a decisive and robust response, further escalating the already fraught international situation. Lavrov further elaborated on the economic and political measure taken by the United States and the European Union, characterizing them as tools of coercion aimed at isolating and weakening Russia. He condemned the extensive sanctions imposed on Russia, arguing that these measures are not legitimate response to international law violations, but rather acts of economic warfare designed to cripple the Russian economy and provoke internal instabilities. According to Lavrov, these sanctions disproportionately affect ordinary Russian citizens, demonstrating the West's disregard for humanitarian consequences in its pursuit of geopolitical objectives. He also criticized the Western media portrayal of the conflict, alleging a systematic campaign of misinformation and propaganda designed to demonize Russia and justify Western aggression. Lavrov asserted that the narrative presented by Western media outlet is biased and lack objectivity, serving only to reinforce the prevailing anti-Russian sentiment. He called upon non-Western nations to resist what he described as Western pressure and to forge a new multipolar world order based on mutual respect and genuine international cooperation, free from the dictates of any single dominant power. This vision of a multipolar world is the cornerstone of Russia's foreign policy, advocating for a distribution of power among multiple major powers, thereby challenging the unipolar system that Russia believes is currently dominated by the United States. The Russian foreign minister's speech also touched upon the broader historical context of international relations, particularly the post-Cold War era. He argued that the collapse of the Soviet Union did not lead to a new era of peace and cooperation, as many in the West had hoped, but instead ushered in a period of unchallenged American dominance, which, according to Lavrov, has led to numerous conflict and intervention worldwide. He cited interventions in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and Syria as examples of Western unilateralism and disregard for international law, claiming that these actions have destabilized entire regions and create power vacuums that have fueled extremism and terrorism. Lavrov contended that the West's current approach to Ukraine is merely a continuation of this pattern, an attempt to expand its influence into a region that Russia considers vital to its security. He emphasized that Russia views these actions as a direct threat to its national security interests and its traditional sphere of influence, necessitating a strong and decisive response. The foreign minister's remark aimed to legitimize Russia's action by framing them within a broader historical narrative of resistance against perceived Western aggression and the pursuit of a more balanced and equitable global order. In his address, Lavrov underlined Russia's commitment to forging new alliances and strengthening existing partnership with countries that share its vision for a multipolar world. He highlighted the growing cooperation between Russia and China, describing it as a strategic partnership aimed at counterbalancing Western influence and promoting a more diverse global governance structure. He also mentioned Russia's engagement with countries in the global south, emphasizing the importance of non-aligned movements and the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. Lavrov asserted that these new alliances are not aimed at confrontation, but at creating a more stable and just international systems where no single power can dictate terms to others. He argued that the West's attempt to isolate Russia have only accelerated the formation of these new geopolitical blocs, thereby undermining its own long-term objectives. The Russian foreign minister's speech served as a call to action for nations that feel marginalized by the current world order, urging them to unite and challenge the established power structure, thereby paving the way for a truly multipolar and equitable international system. Lavrov continued insistence on the notion of World War III having already commenced, albeit in a new form, reflect the strategic efforts to frame the ongoing conflicts and geopolitical tensions in a particular light. By using such strong and evocative language, he aims to elevate the perceived stakes of the current situation, not only for the Russian populace, but also for the international community. This phrasing suggests that the nature of warfare has evolved beyond traditional large-scale military confrontations between nation-states, now encompassing economic sanctions, cyber warfare, information campaigns, and proxy conflicts. In this new form of global conflict, according to Lavrov, the lines between peace and war are blurred, and the struggles for dominance is fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. He suggested that the West's alleged efforts to weaken Russia rather than engage in direct military action constitute a form of warfare designed to achieve strategic objectives without the overt declaration of war. This perspective allows Russia to portray itself as being under attack, even when direct military engagements are limited, thereby justifying its own aggressive foreign policy as a necessary defensive measure. The Russian foreign minister allegations of Western provocation extend beyond Ukraine to include previous intervention in the Middle East. Lavrov referenced historical events such as the Iraq War, the intervention in Libya, and Western involvement in the Syrian conflict, arguing that these actions were driven by a desire for geopolitical control and resources acquisition rather than genuine humanitarian concerns. He contended that these interventions have destabilized the region, led to widespread suffering, and inadvertently fueled the rise of extremist groups, creating a chaotic environment that benefits Western power by allowing them to maintain a presence and exert influence. According to Lavrov, the West's inconsistent application of international law, selectively intervening in some conflicts while ignoring others, expose its hypocritical motives and its self-serving agenda. He argued that these past interventions demonstrate a pattern of behavior in which Western nations prioritize their own strategic interests over the sovereignty and stability of other nations, thereby setting a dangerous precedent for international relations. This historical context is crucial to understanding Russia's worldview, which often views Western foreign policy through a lens of suspicion and perceived aggression. Lavrov's characterizations of Moscow's fighting alone against the collective West is a powerful rhetorical device aimed at fostering a sense of national unity and resilience within Russia. This narrative seeks to galvanize public support for the government's policies by portraying Russia as a besieged nation, bravely standing up against a formidable coalition of adversaries. By emphasizing Russia's isolation, Lavrov attempts to evoke a sense of shared sacrifice and determination, suggesting that the nation must rely on its own strength and resolve to overcome the challenges posed by the West. This rhetoric also serves to downplay the role of other international actors and to simplify the complex geopolitical landscapes into a binary struggle between Russia and the West. While Russia does have allies and partners, particularly within organizations like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Lavrov's emphasis on fighting alone aims to heighten the emotional impact of his message and to reinforce the idea that Russia is a unique civilization with its own distinct path, often at odds with Western norms and values. The warning about Germany and other NATO members preparing for direct military engagement with Russian forces is particularly concerning, as it raises the specter of a direct competition between major powers. Lavrov's comments here are likely intended to serve multiple purposes. Firstly, they aim to deter NATO from any further escalation by highlighting the potentially catastrophic consequences of such action. Secondly, they seek to sow discord within the NATO alliance by suggesting that some members are more aggressive than others, potentially creating divisions and weakening the alliance's overall cohesion. Thirdly, these statements are designed to justify Russia's own military modernization and preparedness efforts, portraying them as necessary defensive measure in response to an imminent threat. The assertion that Germany, a country with a complex history and a strong commitment to peace since World War II, is preparing for war with Russia is a significant claim that aims to provoke a strong reaction and to reshape public perception of the current geopolitical climate. Lavrov's consistent messaging underscores a deep-seated belief within the Russian leadership that the West is actively seeking a military confrontation, a belief that shapes their strategic decision-making and their approach to international diplomacy. The ongoing accusations against the United States and the European Union for their alleged role in provoking global conflicts are central to Russia's narrative of victimhood and self-defense. Lavrov argued that the extensive military aid provided to Ukraine by these entities coupled with their diplomatic support and economic sanctions, constitute a deliberate effort to prolong the conflict and to inflict maximum damage on Russia. He suggested that the West's ultimate goal is not peace or stability, but rather the weakening and fragmentation of Russia, thereby eliminating a significant geopolitical rival. Lavrov also criticized the West's selective outrage, pointing out that while they condemn Russia's action, they often overlook or minimize the action of their own allies, particularly in regions where Western interests are paramount. This perceived double standard, according to Lavrov, undermines the credibility of Western morale arguments and exposes their geopolitical agenda. He emphasized that Russia will not succumb to Western pressure and will continue to pursue its own independent foreign policy, even if it means facing sustained international opposition. This steadfast resolve, as articulated by Lavrov, is a key element of Russia's self-portrayal as a resilient and unyielding power on the global stage. Lavrov further expanded on the idea of a new form of World War III by detailing the various non-military instruments being deployed by the West against Russia. He spoke extensively about the use of information warfare, alleging that Western media outlets and social media platforms are engaged in a coordinated campaign to spread anti-Russian propaganda and distort facts. This, he argued, is designed to manipulate public opinion both within Russia and internationally, thereby undermining the legitimacy of the Russian government and its action. Lavrov also highlighted the role of cultural warfare, suggesting that Western values and cultural norms are being aggressively promoted to erode traditional Russian values and to create internal divisions. He criticized the sanctions regime not just for its economic impact, but also for its broader social and political implication, asserting that it aims to isolate Russia culturally and academically, thereby hindering its development and stifling its independent thoughts. The Russian foreign minister contended that these multifaceted attacks, though not overtly military, are just as destructive and insidious as conventional warfare, aimed at achieving the same strategic objectives: the subjugation of Russia to Western dominance. In his comprehensive address, Lavrov also dwelled into the historical memory of World War II, drawing parallels between the current situation and the existential threat faced by the Soviet Union during that conflict. He invoked the memory of the sacrifice made by the Soviet people to defeat Nazism, suggesting that Russia is once again engaged in a struggle against a resurgent form of fascism, this time allegedly emanating from Ukraine with Western backing. This historical framing is a powerful tool in Russian rhetoric, designed to mobilize nationalistic sentiment and to legitimize the current conflict as a continuation of a righteous struggle against evil. Lavrov argued that the West's failure to condemn certain elements within Ukraine, whom he described as neo-Nazis, demonstrate a selective memory and a cynical disregard for historical truth. He asserted that Russia's mission is not only to protect its security interests, but also to uphold historical justice and to prevent the resurgence of ideologies that led to widespread devastation in the past. This narrative resonates deeply with a segment of the Russian population that view the current conflict as a sacred duty to protect their homeland and their historical legacy. The implications of Lavrov's statements are far-reaching, signaling a deepening entrenchment of Russia's confrontational stance toward the West. His declaration that World War III has already begun, albeit in a new form, served as a stark warning that the world is in a heightened state of global conflict, where traditional diplomatic norms are being increasingly challenged. This perspective suggests that Russia views the current geopolitical landscape not as a series of isolated disputes, but as a holistic struggle for the future of the international order. Lavrov's rhetoric indicates that Russia is prepared for a prolonged period of confrontation and is actively seeking to reshape global power dynamics by fostering new alliances and challenging existing institutions. The emphasis on Western efforts to maintain dominance and weaken Russia underscores a fundamental clash of worldviews where Moscow perceived itself as a bulwark against a unipolar order dominated by the United States and its allies. This ideological struggle, as articulated by Lavrov, is at the heart of the current global tensions and is likely to define international relations for the foreseeable future, making diplomatic resolutions increasingly difficult to achieve without significant shift in policy and perspective from all sides. That's all for me for today. If you like the video presentations and you would like to follow for more, hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. I will see you soon. Bye for now.